Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The protests, phase 2, and much more tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian. Thanks for joining us. This week, I'm joined by a roundtable of journalists, including Karanja Ajanaku, editor of the Tri-State Defender.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Along with Bill Dries, reporter with the Daily Memphian. Karanja, I'll start with you. I don't think, since we've been doing the show remotely, this is, I think, the first roundtable of sorts, virtual roundtable we've done. Obviously, a huge amount going on. But over the last couple of weeks, the protests, the demonstrations in response to the killing of George Floyd, they continue in Memphis. They've morphed and changed some. I mean, the underlying message seems to be the same. But you're just, since the first time we've had you on, your thoughts on what this means to Memphis, what happens next, and so on.
Well, my first thought that it's an opportunity. I mean, I came to the Tri-State Defender with the idea of trying to change Memphis, and had an interim editor at the time, and he let me know he really wasn't interested in that. But I didn't give up the idea that there was a way to have systemic, big-time change in Memphis. And so when I see the energy that's going on out there, my thought is that, hey, maybe this is that time, and that the sane thing to do is to act as if it is. It's an interesting time from a journalism standpoint because, you know, we're working really hard to keep up with the news to make sure that people have the information that they need to be informed. But at the same time, we're affected by it. We're part of it. Our journalists are living it. And so it's been a challenge to find ways to give them the opportunity to express and to contribute how it's affecting them. But I think it's a change time. You know, nothing's guaranteed, but there seems to be some interest and levels of engagement that I know are necessary for big time change that I've not seen in my lifetime here.
Well, why is this different? And we did a show last week with Faith Morris from the National Civil Rights Museum and Archie Willis, a local businessman, but also, you know, a civic leader and engaged in all kinds of activity in Memphis. And I asked the same question of them. Why is this different? I mean, we're all old enough to remember when Rodney King was beaten nearly to death on TV, on video. We've had all kinds of terrible videos in the past. And yet this one does seem to be causing change in an entirely different way.
A combination of things. I mean, I think obviously just the visual nature of the George Floyd thing and being able to see it there in such a long, excruciating time and watch this guy really die in front of us, that's one thing. But timing, you know, there's an aggregate of different things that are happening. And so you have to account for that. And, you know, when you look in science and you look at evolution, it doesn't always come. In fact, most time it doesn't come on some type of smooth continuum. There are these big leaps and spurts triggered by instances and circumstances. And that seems to be the case here. We know this, that it had to happen. We had to get to a point where we readjusted the relationships between the people here, particularly African Americans and European Americans, but between the police department and the citizen. It had to happen. And so the question is, you know, where do we go from here in terms of being able to process the information? One of the things that troubles me is that I hear a lot of people saying, you know what, we got to stop talking. We just got to start doing things. We got to stop talking. We got to stop doing things. And to me, that's sort of scary because I think the problem is that we don't know how to talk. And so we go to a lot of meetings and we're processing things, but we don't really process. You don't hear each other. And that meeting that they had up in the legislature last night between the House members, I mean, they clearly were not talking to each other. I mean, names and calling each other all kinds of things. So we have to be able to use the change agent energy, but be able to apply some basic processes for how do we process information.
Yeah, yeah. The legislature has trouble sometimes communicating about the most basic issues, let alone something this complicated. Let me bring in Bill. Your thoughts, Bill. You know, in the weeks since I've probably spoken to you, as the protests here and the demonstrations here have morphed, changed some. What your observations?
I agree largely with what Karan just said. The thing that impresses me most about what's happening, and it is changing, it's going around corners, it's continuing along the same path, these are pathways. And what I've really been impressed by is the determination of people in the streets and calling for change in other ways. To say this is the time and this is going to happen. There are going to be changes that happen, systemic changes. We've had about 5 or 6 years of activism and protest in the city that has brought to the city and has arisen in the city some really good organizers. With the death of George Floyd and the reaction to it, it's like those 5 years of experience, I think, have really put down roots. And this is the moment where a lot of that building of activity had started to yield results. We also have, for instance, a set of reforms to police conduct that are before the city council. And there will be more that will come. Those measures are being sponsored in large part by millennials who are now on the Memphis City Council as a result of the 2019 elections. This is a watershed moment.
What are some of those reforms, for people who haven't followed it as closely as you, as us, what are some of those reforms that have been put forward?
So far, the resolutions that the City Council has passed are requests of the mayor. There's nothing binding at this point, but those requests include looking at the 8 can't wait set of national reforms around the use of force by the police. Other of the resolutions that passed was to establish a community committee or panel that will assist the mayor in the selection of a new police director when Michael Rawlings retires in about 9 or 10 months. And his retirement date had been set long before any of this came up, just to be clear about that. The Shelby County Commission had several votes on reducing the funding of the Sheriff's Department and reallocating some of that money to other things like the Community Services Division. Both votes during a pretty turbulent budget season for other reasons. Those measures were not successful, but the discussion certainly continues there as well.
I'll go back to Karanja. Your thoughts on what is happening and may happen at City Council and really in the mayor's office as well, in terms of embracing or making change in terms of how policing is handled.
Well, I give people the benefit of a doubt, to start out with, in terms of their commitment to want to bring about change. And then we have to hold people accountable to see whether or not they move, to get something done. It's we've got a large number of new people on the council. They're working to figure out how they work together. And then they got to figure out how to do that in the midst of these twin pandemics here, in terms of the virus and this ongoing racism here. And so I think the thing that I keep looking for, though, is it's an attitude. That's what people are looking for. I mean, they're looking at all the measures that are proposed in terms of police reform and things of that sort, but also they're looking for an attitude. They're trying to get a sense that the people in charge are not only hearing them, but they get it for themselves, and that they're moving on the issues of the day from the standpoint of really trying to make it better for the general populace. And so there's a way you can go about addressing people and talking to people. I see Mr. Strickland trying. I know he's met with some of the protesters and things there, but I just wonder if there's some more help that he might need in terms of fashioning his message. And then on the council and on the county commission, whoa, man, especially on the county commission side, I mean, it's like, what's going on over there? It's like there's just from where I sit, there's just a disconnect in terms of how they're going about processing information. And I'm trying to get a handle on what exactly is it? I mean, are they really that far apart on issues of the day, or is there something personal going on here, from way back? And meantime, the general citizens, we don't have time for that. We want people to straighten up and to deal with the issues of the day in a reasonable manner, and to and be accountable. I mean, I think that's really the bottom line here in all of this stuff here. It's accountability. I mean, we all have to reckon with accountability. That's what people want. They want it of us as journalists. They want it of our legislators.
Yeah. Speaking of the county Mayor Lee Harris will be on the show next week. In terms of the reforms that are being talked about in some parts of the country, there's the defund the police kind of mantra has come up. It is hard to imagine that Jim Strickland, who ran on many issues, but a big issue, obviously, in both campaigns was policing, was rebuilding. I mean, adding to the police ranks, getting from, what did we get down to, 1,900, 1,950 police up to something like 2,300 or 2,400. I mean, it seems hard to believe that Strickland would change direction on that. Right, Karanja? I mean, or will he?
Well, I mean, we know what he says in terms of, the question though is like, okay, do we really understand what we're talking about here with defunding the police? I mean, is he on the same page as the people who are pushing forward with it? And then how do we have a conversation from there? But here's the thing. I don't think we're in a situation here now where we just sit back and we wait to see whether or not Mr. Strickland or anybody else gets it. I mean, I think what people are saying is, hey, look, we're going to apply a pressure here directly and indirectly, and we're going to find a way to push you toward looking at things differently. I think that's what makes things different. Is that energy out there that's pushing from that outside, and that's why when we say, well, this time is different, that we might be able to make a change. It's that pressure energy from the outside. And I know people get concerned about the nature of that pressure and all that kind of stuff. But, from my standpoint, obviously we can't be tearing up things and hurting people and stuff like that. But people got to keep rolling, man. They got to keep pushing. They got to keep pushing the issue here to, if anything substantive is actually going to happen change-wise.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point here. The pressure is going to continue, and all of the people that I've talked to on various fronts are not up for property damage, are not up for looting, are not up for violence, but they are making the clear distinction here that this is probably going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people, this discussion, and they feel like it's necessary for things to happen.
Absolutely.
I mean, same question to you, Bill. I mean, it's not really possible for you to answer, but again, I mean, Strickland, who ran on, rebuilding the police force, adding the number of police. I mean, that has just been a mantra from him in his first campaign, his second campaign. Is there really any likelihood that he would begin to pull back on that? Or is it more putting pressure from the demonstrators' point of view and from all kinds of people's point of view on changing the way policing happens?
Well, the mayor has been very clear as recently as yesterday when he talked to some of the protesters who have camped out in front of City Hall, that he is not for defunding the police really by any of the various definitions out there. If it's defund with an eye toward abolishing the police department, he's not for that. If it's defund the police and reallocate the money for the police to some other use within government that's away from the police, he's not for that. He is for increasing funding, but he's not for doing it at the expense of the police. And I mean increasing funding to other areas. So the discussions continue. And as we've said, you know, defunding has many different definitions in the current context. That will probably narrow at some point. Congress had in House Judiciary yesterday had a discussion about defunding, where the Republicans said, yeah, that's what you want to do. You want to abolish the police. And the Democrats said, no, we're not for abolishing the police. Defund means move and reallocate to other areas. So, and even Commissioner Tammy Sawyer, who made the two proposals to defund the Shelby County Sheriff's Office, said it not defund and abolish the police tomorrow. It's defund with an eye toward reducing what the Sheriff's Department and other law enforcement agencies do over a much longer time frame.
Go ahead, Karanja. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that I remember reading once a Scripps Howard handbook when I was back over at the Commercial Appeal. I think Bill Drees and I are the only two that probably ever read it, right? So, but
Sure.
Well, let me take that back. I don't want to knock anybody else there, but I did find the damn books, excuse me. And in the book, it says that one of the things that stuck out to me was that all change is not progress. Okay, and I think that that's important to keep in mind. And I pair that up against the idea of looking at this country. And a lot of times when the people in charge tend to be European Americans, so-called white people, and they get, you know, they got to do something, you know, especially in response to charges of racism and stuff like that. They want to do something, right? And they put things in place. And so then what happens is you have African Americans a lot of time that are around them, and they're sensitive to what the European Americans do. And then they're down the road we go, you know, with some stuff that's not really been researched or looked at. And when we put a new institutional thing in place. And so all we've done is move from one side of the problem to another. And so one of the key ways to avoid that is that we got to have people from all levels of engagement that are involved in the process. And that's really a challenge. It's supposed to be an inherent part of how we function in the Republic, but it's a long way from reality.
And we've seen that in the last week. We have seen a group of more than 100 nonprofit leaders who have put together an open letter and who started out by saying, first of all, the police response to some of the protests here has been excessive in the use of force. And second of all, whenever I'll say the defecation makes contact with the rotary oscillator in this town on race, the go-to response is, well, the nonprofits will fill the gap. They will be the stopgap here. And these nonprofit leaders, from everything from some of the park conservancies to those involved with community development corporations, just came out with a statement and said, that's adequate. You can't put that much pressure on us over that time and tell us to solve a problem that you should be solving at a citywide and countywide level.
Yeah, and you mentioned Park Conservancy and the nonprofit leaders. I should always note I am on the board of the Overton Park Conservancy, and the executive director Tina Sullivan did sign that, but I, wasn't a part of that, and just disclosure there. We have 7 minutes here. One thing that has happened that has been a big headline and has come out of this, the protests and this kind of awakening and conversation was protests and accusations at a restaurant group in town, the group that owns Porch and Parlor, Flight, a couple other restaurants. And it started on social media where former employees came forward and said that there'd been essentially systemic racism, in that restaurant group in terms of how they hired, how they treated Black customers. And it was not just one or two posts, it was a lot of different people saying it. And ultimately this last week, that restaurant group essentially ousted one of its owners and in pretty, maybe a little, I wouldn't say legalistic, but not too cryptic terms, said that they had to make a lot of change, that they were not, these were not their values, and that they heard what people said and that they were going to make change. And, when that happens, Karanja, I'll go to you, Karanja. It seems to me that group gets the benefit of the doubt going forward. I mean, they clearly acknowledge that there's some bad practices in the past. But going forward, how do you view an organization like that, a company like that? Because it won't be the first, right? I mean, this is a bit of a Me Too moment, I have a feeling, where people are going to come forward and talk about things behind the curtain in businesses and organizations that have been going on.
Yeah, well, a couple of things that, again, it gets back to the word of accountability. I mean, to the degree that they've got contracts and things with the city of Memphis, there are ways to provide checks and balances on that. And that should be the case across the board. But I think the larger question is this for me, because I've run into it in a lot of different ways, is that if we're not going to have part of the conversation where we can get to zero, we all have past. We've all done things for whatever reasons, deliberately or not a part of the culture. But if we want people to change, we have to embrace the possibility that they can change, right? And so, but if you're going to take the position that, well, because you did X, Y, and Z in the past, therefore we can't do anything in the future, well, then where do you go with that, right? And so everybody has to slow it down for a second and first do personal assessments. I know I'm doing that for myself, just looking at myself and what have I been about and what's my roles and responsibilities here. But we do have to take people, it seems to me, at their word to a degree, and then have some specific actions in terms of behavior, and then hold people accountable for their behavior going forward. But if we don't acknowledge that human aspect of being able to get to zero, how do you ever get to one?
Yeah. With just a couple of minutes left, I want to touch on just for a second where we are with the pandemic and the sort of back to business phase reopening. As I said at the top, we are actually paused in phase 2, Bill, in no small part because there was not just a big increase in cases, of positive cases, which can be hard to watch because sometimes there's a big effort to get more testing done, or there's mobile testing. The total number of cases can be not deceiving, but not as telling as the number of hospitalizations. And I think it was Manoj Jain, doctor who's on the task force, came on the show what seems like years ago, was probably a few weeks ago, and said that one of the things he really focuses on is hospitalizations. And I'm looking at the chart on my computer screen here of hospitalizations as tracked by UT Medical School. And there's been a near 50% increase in hospitalizations over just the last week, from 150 to now 220. I assume that was what weighed most heavily, Bill, on the task force as they said, hey, we need to pause this phase reopening.
Yes, the number of daily new cases, which is probably the number that everybody looks at first, is kind of an alarm bell. And what the experts on this do is when they see the rise we've seen, they then start looking at the other numbers, including the hospitalizations, because hospital capacity is a big factor here. They also look at, where is this coming from? Did we do 1,000 or so tests at one institution and that's responsible for the spike? That's not what we're seeing with this. And that was what was behind the decision to say, we're not going to go to phase 3, we're going to stay in phase 2. No time limit set on this, but it's also worth noting that this would be the second extension of staying in phase 2, which was originally supposed to be about a 3-week period here. So what they're seeing, they believe, is also a snapshot from 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, around the Memorial Day weekend. Things really started to loosen up in terms of people getting out and about.
Yeah. And the other thing that they pointed out was that while early, a lot of the hospitalizations and cases were, nursing homes, older people, kind of concentrations of those most at risk. Now, a lot of the cases and hospitalizations, more of them, I wouldn't say a lot, more of them are younger people, healthier without the underlying conditions. And that was concerning as well. We had a mask ordinance passed this past week. Am I right that it has, I guess I'll stay with Bill on this because it is passed by council and has not been signed or made official by the mayor. And now we have Brian Kelsey, state senator, asking for an Tennessee attorney general opinion. So everything's a little muddy on what's next with the ordinance, the mask ordinance.
Well, technically, the council approved it through a parliamentary maneuver so that it could be effective immediately. It's a pretty common thing that's used in other cases. And the indication from Mayor Strickland is that he will sign it. He said yesterday that the administration is looking at how enforcement works on this. Meanwhile, Brian Kelsey wants an attorney general's opinion from the state on whether this is constitutional. And by the wording of his request for that opinion, he does not believe that it is. He does not believe that a city or local municipality can do this without approval from the Tennessee legislature at the least, or from the state health department. So effective immediately, but in terms of enforcement, that's not going to start tonight. When it does start, police will not be a big part of the enforcement. It will likely be local code enforcement officers.
All right. Well, we are out of time. Thank you, Bill. And thank you, Karanja. It was good to see you. It's been too long, and I appreciate especially coming on and talking about things that are going on right now and talking about it so passionately. So thank you again, and we'll see you sooner. But that is all the time we have this week. Thank you for joining us again. Next week, County Mayor Lee Harris.